Hey everybody, it's EJ from iDesign.com, and today I'm here with my very first X-Particles tutorial. In this tutorial, I'm going to teach you how to use X-Particles and some of the really cool things inside of Cinema 4D to create this kind of nice paint drippy, melty, waxy kind of effect using X-Particles, and again with some of the native things inside of Cinema 4D. So the great part about X-Particles is the workflow is very familiar with what you're used to, like using in Cinema 4D with Cinema 4D, the Mograph Module and stuff like that. So a lot of this stuff makes a lot of sense, but it's so deep. X-Particles is such a deep piece, or just such a deep plugin that you really need to sit down and take some time to learn everything, or you're gonna get completely lost, like I kind of did. So. Once you actually figure out what each of the modifiers do, what each of the generators do, it's very, very simple. So it's almost like if you just jumped into Mograph and cloners and effectors and stuff, you have to learn a little bit to know how everything kind of works in that kind of workflow. So it's the same thing with X-Particles. And today I'm going to show you the workflow I came up with to create this kind of drippy, plasticky, melty kind of thing going on here. So let's just go and jump in and get started with some X-Particles. So the object I'm going to be melting is this bonjour. I made it out of just a simple spline that you can see right here if I turn everything else off. So it's just a spline. It's in 3D space. You can see on the top view here we have some nice depth on the Z, and basically just did a spline wrap on a capsule. And if I turn everything on, you can see that I created my bonjour little script here, and just had a sphere for the little dot on the J. So, and the reason why I have this all under a connect object is because I want to kind of have these, both the main bonjour script and the sphere here kind of act as one single object. So that's what the connect object does, is basically melds everything together and treats everything as if it was one big huge mesh. So what I'm going to be using with this connect object is this is what we're actually going to be building our little blobby object, and it's going to spell out the same word here, and we're just going to generate a whole bunch of particles and basically rebuild this out of particles that we can then start melting and kind of affecting the particles with gravity. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, so let's just go ahead and just recreate this script using just particles. So with X-Particles, it's very easy. This kind of workflow, if you understand a decent amount of X-Particles, you should be able to follow along fairly easy. So to get an emitter, we're just going to grab this XP emitter. And by default, what it has is just the emitter shape of a rectangle. And we actually need to use this object, this connect object, to actually emit particles. So we can change the emitter shape from rectangle to object. So now we can, this is where that connect object comes in handy, is since it's treating both our script with our spline wrap and the sphere, we can just drag this connect object. And what I'm going to do is just kind of hide the connect object from view. And so we have our bonjour connect being the object emitter shape. And what we're going to do, we don't want to emit from the polygon center. If I hit play, you can see that it's just emitting from the center. What we actually want to do is emit from the object's volume. We want to fill up the volume of that object with particles. And the first thing that you'll see is, number one, there's not a whole lot of particles there, but number two, all of our particles are moving around because it has an emission speed. And so we're just going to bring down the speed to 0, so it just kind of appears. And what we're going to do is change this emission mode from rate, which kind of has a birth rate throughout the whole entire composition. We just want this to shoot out a whole bunch of particles and just be stationary. So to do that, we're going to change the emission mode from rate to just a pulse. So we're just going to have a single pulse of particles, and we're going to turn off emit all frames. We're just going to have a length of 1 frame And the start emission is going to start at 0, and the end emission is going to just be 1 frame. And for the birth rate, we'll actually bring this up fairly high to about 25,000 particles, because we need to have enough particles to define the actual shape so that when you actually apply the skinner to make it blobby, it actually still looks smooth and has that really nice defined shape of our original Bonjour object. So what we're going to do now is just hit play, and you'll notice that even though our birth rate is set to 25,000 particles, you can see that this does not look anywhere near 25,000 particles. So X-Particles is kind of screwing us here. What's going on? Like I ordered more particles than this. You gave me that. What's going on? So the important part about using the object volume is this max retries. And what this max retries does is the lower the number, the speedier the calculation to fill up your object volume is, but the less accurate. So right now the max retries set very low, but if you notice, I cranked up the max retries from 20 to 500, go to frame 0 and hit play. You can see that we have a lot more particles actually filling up our volume. We can actually make out the form or the actual geometry, the volume of that Bonjour shape. So basically why it's set at a lower max retry amount is because the higher you go, the more calculations and the slower your viewport will go, or the slower it will take to calculate that volume. But we really don't have to worry about that, because we're just kind of generating particles and not even moving this set of particles. And this is part of the whole workflow, is we're going to use this one emitter to create our form. We're going to then use a second emitter. So this is actually looking pretty good. We can actually make out the form. So what we're going to do is use a second emitter. And what we're going to use this second emitter for, let me just grab a second emitter here. I'm going to rename our original emitter just our main emitter. And the second emitter, this will be our drip emitter. There we go. So we're going to have a whole separate emitter to actually create the drips based on the particles that we generated with the main emitter. And the reason why we do this is because we're going to be applying a lot of effects like gravity and fluid dynamics and stuff that we don't want to really apply to our whole entire rig. So to be able to have full control, we're just going to create another emitter that we can then apply different effects to and generate more particles based on this main emitter particle mesh, basically. So once we have our drip emitter, what we're going to do to actually use this emitter to generate more particles based off of this main emitter particle pulse is by using what's called a spawning emitter, or just a spawn object. And if I go to modifiers here, let's see, where is it? Generate, and we have XP spawn. And what XP spawn does, it's very aptly named, it just spawns particles based off of another emitter group. So the spawning emitter that we want to use is this drip emitter. So let's just rename this as spawning emitter. So this is going to be the emitter that's going to be spawning new particles based off of this main emitter group. So notice what happens when I go and we have this spawning emitter option here. I'm going to drag in our spawning emitter into that, and you're going to see that that icon changed. So basically what we're doing is we're using this spawn object to spawn more particles based off of this other object here. So what we can do is, if I go to my spawning emitter, let's just change the speed down to 0, and you can see in my XP spawn, what it's actually doing is it's going to spawn 300 particles from every single particle from our main emitter, and that's a lot. So I'm just going to bring this down to 1, and what we can do is just hit play, and right now nothing's really happening. So let's actually add a modifier. So let's actually add some gravity so we can actually see some stuff happen to our actual spawned particles here. So let's go to modifiers. Let's grab gravity here. So the one thing we need to keep in mind when we add modifiers to our scene is that we're not affecting our main emitter with it. So if we go to modifiers and we can go to the exclude mode, we're going to exclude the gravity from our main emitter here. So our main emitter, those particles are just staying there. They're not doing anything. They're sitting, they're staying, they're just chilling out. And everything we're going to actually modify is the particles that are created by the spawning emitter in this spawn. So now, if we hit play, you'll see that we now generate, with our spawn, we have one set of particles spawning from that 20, what did we have here? 25,000 particles. So we're spawning 25,000 particles each second. So we have one spawn number, and the timing is per second. And we can actually just have this spawn once, and we can actually have this kill the original particle, so the original main emitter particle, after it gets spawned a new particle. So if I change that to, and if I turn on this option, see what happens is what we just killed all those original particles, and we have those spawn particles just falling through the ground. So let's actually fix the fact that that's all of our particles are falling through the floor. So I have this plane object here that I have hidden. I'm just going to go ahead and make this dynamic, and this is the greatest part about X-Particles, is just the workflow is so familiar to the workflow that you're already used to with dynamics tags and stuff like that. So if you want to have an object collide into particles, we just simply add this XP collider to the plane object that's acting as our floor. And if I hit play, you'll see that our original main emitter particles have that initial pulse, and then within that second, we're having those. We're having a new set of particles spawn from those original main emitter particles, and those are the ones that have gravity applied to it. So the cool part about this, and we also have them colliding into our floor now because we have that emitter tag. So the whole reason why we create this whole second emitter is the fact that the XP spawn has a fall off. So this is the key to this whole workflow. So what I'm going to do is change this from infinite. I'm going to change this to sphere. So let's go ahead and let's just put our spherical fall off right about there. If I hit play, you can see that we're now only affecting wherever this fall off goes. So I can actually move this around and actually have gravity affect this based on this fall off. So basically this spawn emitter turns into like a gravity fall off almost. And again, since we have our kill original particle after spawning turned on, it's just killing those original particles, and then just when those spawn particles are created, they're getting affected by the gravity. So if we actually want to keep the original main emitter particles, we can just turn that kill original particle after spawning off, hit play, and you can see that we're now just having particles just kind of fall. And this is, I think you're seeing where I'm going with the whole drip thing happening. So this is all well and good. Let's actually create some form to this whole scene, because right now, if I render, we don't have anything. Those are just particles. We actually need to apply a mesh to the emitters here, and to create geometry based on these particles. So to do that, the really fun thing I like playing around with is this XP Skinner. And basically this just applies a geometry mesh to a particle, to a group of particles. So what we're going to do is first we need to set some sources of what we're going to apply meshes to. And we're going to apply meshes to this main emitter. And you can see we have this big, huge, blobby mesh now. And we're also going to apply it to our spawning emitter. So both of our emitters here, because we don't want just our main emitter to have geometry, but we also want all of the spawn particles to have geometry too, because these are going to be our drips eventually. So the first thing we can do is change this surface from heart to something more fluid looking, like this Zoo Bridson. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that right. But so what we're going to do is, so that gives it a little bit of a tighter mesh. We're just going to play around with some of these settings here. And the big thing about X-Particles is that it's a lot of just trial and error and just kind of messing around and screwing around with options and seeing what works and what doesn't. So this preserve volume just kind of preserves the actual original volume of the particles. And the one thing that is very helpful is under the smoothing tab, the geometry. You can see that if I turn that on, turn that off, there's a huge difference. You can see that when the smoothing geometry is turned on, it just smooths out our whole entire mesh and makes it look really, really nice. So you can turn this up or down here. The more iterations you go, the more smooth it gets. So maybe artistically you like this thinner kind of look, go for it. I want a little bit of a kind of thicker mesh going on here. So again, we can adjust the preserve volume if we want to, but that's looking pretty good right now. So we actually have a mesh now, and I have this material already, this crayon material that you can actually find in the my Text Edge Pro material little set there. So if you buy that, you have that already. So I just have this really nice kind of crayon texture, and it really makes this look nice and plasticky and kind of ooey gooey, and almost kind of cheesy, I guess. So the next thing we need to do is, so we have our Skinner, we have our spawn, we have our gravity. If I actually hit play, and let's see, where's our spawn fall off? You can see that where my spawn fall off is our spherical fall off. We actually have some drips happening based on all of our particles falling, and since we're also applying a Skinner mesh to all those emitted particles, we're getting these little drips. But they're not as nice as these nice strands of drips going on in the original picture that I showed you guys. So the final piece to this puzzle is adding one more modifier, and well, not a modifier, but something that can generate more particle information, and that is the XP trail. So this is just like a tracer in Mograph Module, where we can actually have particles create trails that we can then also skin as well. So I'm going to go ahead and bring that XP trail into the Skinner. So whatever these trails, so whatever trails XP trail generates, it will also be skinned with geometry. So again, I need to make sure that my main emitter does not have any trail stuff going on at all. And we can go into our trail, and we need to set what emitter we want. We're going to bring the spawning emitter in there. We don't want a full scene trail. We just want a specific length of trail. So actually the default settings here of a trail length of 30 frames or 1 second works. We can get a little bit of variation in there by just setting a little bit of frame, like 5 frames, and hit play. And actually, let me turn off the Skinner here so we can just see the particles in action and the actual XP trail. So you can see that where my gravity is, we now have a whole crap ton of trails being traced by all of our particles that are then moving and falling due to the gravity. And actually the one thing I want to do is, this gravity is set way too high. If we want these nice plasticky drips, those drips kind of move very slowly. They don't really fall all that fast. So let's actually bring our gravity strength down to say 230. We can give a little bit of variation there so it's not all uniform falling. So now if I hit play again, you can see that it's a lot slower. It looks a lot more believable that this is some kind of like ooey gooey thing. We can actually bring down the gravity strength a little bit more. But the final thing is, so actually that wasn't the final piece of the that wasn't the final piece of the puzzle. But that when I do turn that on, you can see we do have these really nice trails. But the thing you'll notice is that these just kind of fall down and don't really do anything after that. And it doesn't really look all that liquidy because what we need to do is actually apply some fluid dynamics to this whole entire shebang. And so what we're going to do is, again, we don't want to have any fluid dynamics on our main emitter. So I'm going to go and put that in the exclude. Just wanted to affect our spawning emitter. And I'm actually going to, on our spawn, I'm going to just bring the scale down because I don't want this big, huge strand of blobbiness happening. I don't want a big, huge drip. So if we go into our fluid, we want collider reactions. And again, a lot of X-Particles is just trial and error and just kind of messing around. But what I found that looked the best was just bring everything to about 10%. So the viscosity, the repulsion. But the one main thing is the density. So you want this to be, so if it's plastic, it's not going to be as light and viscous as like water. So to make this a more heavier, dense fluid, we're going to crank up the density to about 5,000. And if I hit play, so you can see that we have our spawn right here. And if I just bring up the fall off a little bit more, you can see that now this is kind of when it reacts with the ground, it acts a little bit more liquidy. So we have this nice liquidy drop happening. So now, and you can see as the particles are falling, this is kind of spreading out, just like you would think some melted plastic would look. So if I just pause that right there, hit render, this looks really, really good. Just this one little liquidy kind of drip. And I just love how it kind of piles up and then kind of smooths and disperses out. And the dispersion is all through the XP fluid here. And it's actually controlled by the stiffness. So if you don't want those drips to spread out, I have the stiffness all the way down to 0. Let's see if this works. So number one, you can see that everything's clumping together a lot more. And once it hits the floor, there's no spreading. So this does not act like liquid. So the big part of this looking really good is having the stiffness value. And look at just what happened. That looks really, really awesome right there. So there's a lot of happy accidents that happen just experimenting with X-Particles. And like I said, I've said this a couple of times, X-Particles is all about experimentation. I think that's what that X stands for, experimenting with particles. And you have a lot of fun with it too. So the stiffness all the way up, you get this nice, really nice liquidy stuff going on in the build-up and the spread. You can also control how it impacts the floor by going into your XP or your X-Particles collider tag. We don't want any bounce with our particles. We just want the liquid to kind of melt and fall. One thing we can adjust here is bring up the friction and maybe adjust the friction variation so again it's less uniform. Let's just hit play again. And again you can go and just bring this spawn around and just bring the fall off all over the place, and you can see that this is creating, except for right there, you got to be careful with where you place the fall off so you can get this big explosion stuff going. And actually I've found how to kind of prevent those explosions from happening is going to the XP spawn, going to the fall off, and just bringing the fall off to 100%. So it's just going to be nice, smooth, gradual fall off from the very center of the sphere to the outside. So it's going to be this nice ramp. So basically what you can do is just start playing around with the fall off shape and seeing what looks good, what's creating some really nice drips from your mesh. And then basically what I've done is just kind of gotten creative and experimenting with duplicating. So I'm going to hit Command and just drag, and I'm going to duplicate this XP spawn and just place it all over this word here. Just kind of place it all over the place. What I found works really good is just placing the fall-offs towards the bottom of the mesh here. So like I have at the bottom of the O, and even just kind of playing around with where, what looks best with positioning these fall-offs. So basically you just selectively and creatively just kind of put these, just have your little artistic license that you got in school that you carry around your wallet, and just kind of place these wherever you want. And then just kind of hit play again, experimentation, particles, and then with all of these fall-offs kind of in our mesh, we're now creating a whole bunch of drips. And that's looking pretty dang cool. So again, if these drips are falling way too fast, which I almost think they are, just bring the gravity strength down. And with the gravity strength, you also have to keep in mind that your trail is only going to last 30 frames. So if you're really slowing things down and you need to extend your trails, just bring that trail length up a little bit. So I think that's looking pretty good. Let's just stop it right there. And the final thing I want to show you is, so again, X-Particles is really awesome with just the fact of how cohesive it is and how compatible it is with everything inside of Cinema 4D. And the one thing that I like to use a lot is just using particles, X-Particles with deformers. And one deformer that really came in handy for me with this project, let me just add just one more spawn. Let's get some more drips going on here. Let's scale this up. Just want to have a few more drips just so I can show you this final thing. Put the icing on the cake, the drippy icing. So again, you got to be careful with where you position your spawns, because if they're inside the mesh, it's going to kind of explode out some of those particles in there. So you want to have that center not directly inside the mesh there. Alright, so now our drips are happening. They're going. Which one's going to win? Oh, it was the O. The O drip won. Alright, so we're just playing this out. We're getting the drips here. So the final thing I wanted to show you guys is by using, so again, you can use deformers and a lot of other objects that exist in Cinema 4D with X-Particles. The one thing I like to use with the Skinner is the smoothing deformer. So I'm just going to make the smoothing deformer a child of the Skinner, and you can see that automatically we just smoothed the heck out of everything and really made this really ooey gooey looking. So I'm just going to hit render. And you can see that just by applying that smoothing deformer, that really smoothed out our mesh, even on top of the smoothing that you can do in the XP Skinner. Sometimes the XP Skinner can get you some of the way, but then applying the smoothing deformer can get you the rest. So maybe that's a little bit too much of smoothing, so you can bring the iterations down. The stiffness is the higher the stiffness, the less smoothing you're going to get. So if you want way more smoothing, just bring this the stiffness value down. So again, render this out. And again, you can have a lot of fun with, again, experimentation particles, experimenting with your Skinner, the surface type, the smoothing on this, the custom radius, the polygon size, and again you have the render polygon size, so it's kind of like a metaball mesh where you can have the viewport size and then the actual render size. But I'd say this looks pretty dang good. I would say that I would put a lot more spawn points just to have more drips happening. But that's basically how you use X-Particles to create these nice little liquidy, plasticky drips like I have in this final composition here. So that was it. That was my first X-Particles tutorial. Hopefully that made sense. I've just been getting into X-Particles a lot lately and having a ton of fun. Again, experimenting with it. A lot of this is just trial and error. There's just so many options. It's such a deep plugin, and not a lot of documentation out there. Not a lot of people doing tutorials on this stuff. So it's kind of, you just have to kind of do it by brute force and see what works, what doesn't, just by kind of tweaking all of the options here. So if you have any questions, and I know you might have a few, just let me know. I'd be happy to help you guys out. I really want to see if you guys are messing around with X-Particles. I want to see if you guys can recreate this. I want to see your drippy particle compositions and renders and stuff, and be sure to post them in the comments section and all that good stuff. And again, if you have questions, just let me know. And if you want more X-Particles tutorials, let me know what you want to see, and I'd be happy to kind of mess around and see if I can figure it out. So thanks a lot for watching, everyone, and I will see you guys in the next tutorial. Bye, guys.